You have finally dropped that weight. You have finally gotten thicker. You have finally lost some fat. Overall, you feel healthier. You feel much better about yourself. Up until then, you realize that there's just something that you don't like, and that is the result of you working out. And that is the fact that now your breasts have deflated. So for today's video, I'm just going to be talking about the fitness industry and its relationship with breast augmentations. Woo! But before we get into that, I want to talk about how the breasts are viewed in society as a whole, and we're going to be starting from the Renaissance era. The Venus of Willendorf from the years 20,000 through 18,000 BCE is an example of the different perceptions of the breast and what it represents. Historians are still debating if this is considered to be quote-unquote Paleolithic porn or a depiction of a great goddess. But before we dive into how the breasts are viewed socially, we're going to be going back to the breast's primary function. So breastfeeding dates back to around 3000 BCE from civilizations that populated Egypt, the Levant, and Mesopotamia. During this time, breastfeeding was extremely important for infants to get their nutrients and for their overall well-being. While this mostly had to do with the quality of the milk produced rather than who is doing the breastfeeding per se, breasts were seen as a symbol of maternity. Some historians do believe that the breast sexual image to be culturally and historically specific. There are cultures that emphasize other body parts, such as the bottom in Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean, the feet in China, and the neck in Japan. However, due to the historical, economical, and technological changes in the recent years, Western ideals are being shared globally, which means that these cultural differences are becoming less different. In today's Western world, breasts are regarded as quote-unquote visual phenomenon, which contrasts the historical importance of breasts as their primary function. Are any of you guys old enough, or you probably have heard, regardless of the year you were born, the 2004 Super Bowl performance of Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake, where Janet Jackson accidentally had a nip slip due to a wardrobe malfunction caused by Justin Timberlake. The media pretty much said nothing of Justin Timberlake, but pretty much went to town on Janet Jackson for something that really wasn't her fault. This whole incident really showcases two key elements. Number one being the breast as being overtly sexualized. The second being on how often it is policed on how much it is acceptable to show, which is socially correlated to the level of decency a woman has. But I am mainly going to be talking about the first element, which is how much it is sexualized. And we're going to go back in time to how this really began during World War II. This was a time when soldiers possessed copies of magazines like Esquire, which featured the pinup girl, which we're all pretty much familiar with. The pinup girl was the ideal image of femininity with long legs and large breasts. By the 1950s, the US was pretty much like it is today, capitalistic at its finest by selling sex, which of course included boobs. Given the breast-obsessed culture that began in the 50s, this of course introduced the breast augmentation for purely aesthetic reasons. Keep in mind, the first boob job wasn't in the 50s, it was in the 1890s. However, it became more widely known in the 50s. This catapulted women everywhere to feeling insecure about their small chest when it really wasn't a concern before. So how exactly does this have anything to do with the fitness industry? Well, we're gonna have to take a trip to the 1980s. The 80s were the decade for fitness, especially for women in the fitness industry and just women as a whole starting to get into fitness. From your Jane Fonda to your Olivia Newton-John. Women's bodybuilding shows took off in the early 80s, which brings me to a little documentary that came out in 1985 called Pumping Iron 2. The Women. This was a sequel to Pumping Iron, which featured Arnold. Pumping Iron 2, The Women, mostly focuses on Rachel McLish, who was the first winner, Bev Francis, and Carla Dunlap, prepping and competing at the 1983 World Championship at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas.
Intense, graphic, sexy, euphoric, provocative, edgy.
The main gist of the documentary is a debate between athleticism versus femininity. Competitors who had a more feminine build placed higher overall. This was made an effort to promote against steroid usage, at least for the IFBB, which stands for the International Federation of Bodybuilding. Competitor Bev Francis was the most muscular out of the bunch, but she did not stand a chance of winning this competition due to the fact of what the judges were looking for.
I was invited into it simply because of the way I looked. Okay, I had more muscle than any other woman around. Come on. The bodybuilding hierarchy at this time simply was not ready for what I presented and didn't want what I showed.
The analysis of the word femininity and what you have to look for. This is an official IFBB analysis of the meaning of that word.
The officials and the judges, they didn't like me very much because I gave them just this huge headache and problem, and it was mainly because the audience loved what I presented on stage. The fans love muscle, whereas the judges were trying to control what the sport should look like. There was a scene in the movie where we had a meeting and the judges were talking about what they wanted.
Who are we to say what looks like a woman and what doesn't? And who are we to say...
They didn't actually say my name, but they kind of skirted around and were saying there is a contestant in this competition who doesn't represent, what women want to look like. There was only one judge who really backed me. I think his quote was to tell the bodybuilders how much muscle they can have is like...
The US Ski Federation told women skiers that they could only ski so fast.
And they're saying, but women are women and men are men. And that was how they justified their decision. Men are men and women are women.
In our tradition, we start with the lowest place. We'll be receiving $400. And eighth place goes to Bev Francis, Australia.
But the movie...
Now, this was a pretty huge turning point considering the fact that bodybuilding for women has changed a lot over the past several decades. Rachel McLish's physique is drastically different from the kind of physique that we're used to seeing in bodybuilding today. This debate between femininity and athleticism had a lot to do with the different divisions that came after the 1980s. The figure division, introduced around 2003, focuses on muscular definition, but not too much on size. Bikini, introduced at the year 2010, focuses on being fit, lean, curvy, with sex appeal. You're also judged for your overall skin tone, hair, and facial beauty. Bikini competitors' physiques are similar to the ones that you will see on fitness magazines or on social media today in the fitness side of Instagram. The physique division, introduced around 2011-2012, focuses on muscle tone and size, as well as symmetry. This is more similar to figure, however, there's more emphasis on muscle mass. Keep in mind that I'm mainly talking about the IFBB Federation, as there are other federations out there with different timestamps as to what year they were created. Dana Lynn Bailey is the first ever winner of the Women's Physique Showdown at the 2013 Olympia. In the past, she has expressed insecurities on her breast size and how she almost felt pressure to get breast implants in order to win one of these bodybuilding shows that existed at that time. As a matter of fact, her physique is what ended up creating the division of physique in the first place. Now, while the 80s were a time of fitness and overall physical health, Women outside of the scope of bodybuilding didn't necessarily feel the pressure to get breast implants. And this really wasn't until the 1990s. The 90s were most notably known for popularizing the heroin chic aesthetic or body type, which was popularized by Kate Moss. But there was another body type that grew in popularity, and that was the slender yet toned physique with the V-taper shape. Having larger breasts with a skinny frame became mainstream, and so did breast augmentations. This spike of breast augmentations is all due to a little show called Baywatch.
Hey, do that thing for Baywatch! She's running down the beach!
I mean, let's face it, the only reason why people watched the show was because of big-chested women running in the beach. And I really don't think it's any coincidence that two of the show's actresses were associated with Playboy before the show. This included Erica Eleniak, who was on the show for the first season, and of course, Pamela Anderson. As I've mentioned before, most people have watched this show because of its sex appeal. That is what contributed mostly to the popularity that it had. And it had a lot of popularity. According to TV Guide, Baywatch was the first billion viewer show in history. And it is no surprise the level of influence this show really had. During this show's run, the rate of breast augmentations went up 500%. Nicole Edgar was one of the actresses on the show, having joined the show during its third season in 1992. Most of the female cast already had big chests, but Nicole Edgar was small-chested. That being said, she felt the immense pressure to get breast augmentation herself.
Nicole was, kind of intimidated, I think, by Pam.
So an episode that I was doing, I was in the middle of a scene, and we shot the scene on a Friday. During the holiday weekend, she went out and got breast implants and went from an A cup to a double D.
And came back to complete the same episode, having had her boobs done. We were on a schedule. We had to complete the episode.
We had to put a jacket on her to cover her breasts, so you didn't notice that she went from small to big. So the rest of the episode, we kept her covered. And then after that, she wasn't featured in a couple of episodes.
Now, I don't think it is debatable to say that Pamela Anderson was the most popular out of the cast. She joined the cast into its third season, and ratings went up from there. Her character of CJ Parker and Pamela Anderson herself had the most influence amongst women, to the point where when she got her breast implants taken out in 1999, after she had already left the show, there seemed to have been a correlation with women everywhere also getting rid of their implants. As a matter of fact, a lot of women complained about the kind of attention they were getting.
Pamela proudly flaunts her augmented body and owns her status as a sex symbol. And millions of viewers of Baywatch are similarly inspired.
From the early 90s into, the 2000s, the rate of breast augmentation went up about 500%. The most popular age category were 19 to 35-year-olds. So Baywatch helped normalize plastic surgery. The actresses on that show were very open about their own experiences. Prior to that, it was really taboo.
In the 90s, Baywatch was the biggest advertisement for plastic surgery.
We did interviews with college-age students that had had breast augmentation in particular, and we found that most of them regretted it, and it made them feel very uncomfortable.
People have that notion that somehow by having cosmetic surgery, their life will change because they're going to look like Pamela Anderson.
You fantasize about having that kind of attention, but the reality of it is, these women really didn't like it. The other thing that we saw is an increase in the size of the implants. So implants went up 40% in size during that era.
This is 600 cc's. What Pamela had was actually even larger than this by another 30%. Those implants weigh almost 2 pounds or basically a kilogram each.
And it didn't feel near as glamorous as what they thought it was going to feel like, because it doesn't really fix what they had hoped that it would fix.
Now, by the standards of the fitness industry, Pamela Anderson and a lot of the actresses on the show were not muscular. But if you look at the covers of a lot of fitness magazines in the 1990s, you'll realize that their physiques are not far off from the women of Baywatch. While mainstream ideals of beauty changed from the 90s to the 2000s, fitness ideals did not change as much, even though this isn't mutually exclusive. So we're just gonna jump to the 2010s. It is no surprise that nowadays it isn't as much of the size of your breast as the size of your butt. Well, that's just the case when we look at the amount of Instagram followers certain fitness influencers have. Now, this video isn't in any way, shape, or form trying to convince anyone to get breast augmentation, nor am I arguing against it. The main purpose is to go into it with a mind of your own, and not with a monkey see, monkey do mentality. I mean, this went from breastfeeding and motherhood to Playboy, to size not really meaning much to the bigger the better. Shit is constantly changing and it's exhausting. If there's anything I will want you guys to take away from this video, it's just that. Everything is changing all the time. One way to survive that is to get to know yourself on a deeper level and not allowing anyone to tell you otherwise. But yeah, I'm done now.